Have you ever tried to arrange your game collection by genre? Honestly, I'd advise against it. It's a nice thought, but it never really works out. You'll be going along putting FPS games with other FPS games, platformers with other platformers, and so on, and then something comes along that doesn't quite fit and completely messes up your flow. We're talking about those games for our list today. Titles that flew in the face of genre classification, those that were impossible to fit into a clearly defined niche, and in short, those that dared to be different. The developers behind these games took inspiration from a variety of established genres, mixed in some ingenious ideas of their own, and cooked up something that's definitely a video game, but we're just not sure what kind. We all like to think we're different and that each one of us is a unique little snowflake, but some games truly lived up to that ideal, and we're going to look at 10 of the most interesting ones right now. I'm the one-of-a-kind Peter from TripleJump, and here are 10 video games that defy genre classification. Number 10. Flower. Genova Chen, creator of 2009 PSN game Flower, developed this journey predecessor with the mindset that its artistic qualities and its ability to evoke an emotional response were much more important than its gameplay. As such, Flower borders on what you might refer to as an experience rather than a game. It definitely is a game though, a game in which players control the wind and direct a petal through a variety of dreamlike landscapes. As the petal passes by flowers, it will cause them to bloom, and more petals will join the flowing procession, until hundreds of them are billowing around like a stream of multicolored confetti. The idyllic, ethereal landscapes are identified as existing inside the dreams of flowers, and players navigate through these dreams using the PS3's 6-axis motion controls right through until the finale, where the petals bring life and joy to a bleak grey city. This conclusion preaches that nature and humanity can coexist in harmony, even if it is just in the dreams of our potted plants. Flower is difficult to classify. It's almost as if it's a third-person airborne combat game like its PS3 contemporary Lair, but with absolutely everything removed until you're left with just some basic controls, a cool idea, and, no dragon battles. It's quite beautiful, in a way, but then I guess that was the point. Number 9. Papers, Please. Have you ever wondered what it would be like to work as an inspector at a border checkpoint? Hanging out in a booth and making hundreds of potentially life-changing decisions every day sounds like a high-pressure environment to us, and successful 2013 indie game Papers, Please attempts to put you right there in the thick of it. Managing the checkpoint and trying to figure out who should be allowed into the country and who should be kicked back into no man's land offers no specific outcome that counts as winning the game, and there are large moral grey areas when it comes to deciding each person's fate. Despite all this, Wikipedia identifies Papers, Please as a puzzle game, technically putting it right in there with the likes of, Puzzle Bobble. Lives and national security aren't at stake in the rainbow-saturated world of bubble-popping dinosaurs though, and Bob and Bob don't have to ensure that they treat immigrants fairly while also making enough money to look after their family. Not that we know of, anyway. Basically, what I'm trying to say is that Papers, Please is quite a lot more than a simple puzzle game, and as far as we're concerned, it very much defies genre classification, thus qualifying it for this list. Next, number 8. Jet Set Radio. The next game on our list skates around a few genres but doesn't quite settle on any one in particular. Developed by Smilebit and released in 2000 for the Dreamcast, Jet Set Radio was one of the first games to use the now familiar cel-shading visual style and presented a cool and vibrant take on the streets of Tokyo for players to explore, complete with a snappy hip-hop soundtrack to match. In the game, players take on the role of a member of an inline skate gang and must explore various urban areas, spraying over other gangs' graffiti tags with tags of their own. Wikipedia dumps Jet Set Radio in the all-too-broad action genre bucket, which doesn't take into consideration the game's extreme sports flavour, its emphasis on attitude, and the fact that when it comes down to it, it actually plays a bit like an open-world 3D platformer. Mario 64 via Tony Hawk's Pro Skater, if you will. With its funky street-smart style, style and its vandalism-based gameplay, maybe we could make up a new genre for Jet Set Radio, the Juvenile Delinquent Simulator, and throw Mark Echo's Getting Up and Splatoon in there too. Oh wait, vandalism. I'm sounding like an old person, aren't I? Yeah, you know what, never mind, let's just call it an action game. I'm still young. Number 7. Pokemon Snap. Imagine an on-rail shooter like House of the Dead or maybe Panzer Dragoon, but you're not shooting down undead horrors or Imperial battleships, you're shooting snaps of your favourite Pokemon to fill up your Poke photo album. That's what you've got with 1999's Pokemon Snap and its surprise 2021 follow-up. That and nothing else. Ostensibly a peaceful, laid-back sort of game, though with some very tricky moments if you want to get the really rare photos, Pokemon Snap entirely casts aside the turn-based RPG mechanics of the mainline series, in fact it does away with combat altogether, and forms a nice little genre all of its own. Now it's not uncommon for photography to show up as a side activity in games, especially on modern consoles, but it's very rare to see it as the one and only focus of a title, meaning that photography em-up sadly isn't its own recognised genre. A hard thing to admit for this Beyond Good and Evil fan. So where to file the 2 Pokemon Snap games in your genre-organised gaming library then? Well, like we said, on-rail shooter seems to be the closest comparison, but do they really belong next to House of the Dead overkill and its gore-drenched, expletive-laden ultra-violence? We'll let you be the judge, but if you answered yes, you are definitely playing Pokemon Snap incorrectly. Ugh. Number 6. Nights into Dreams. In Sonic Team's Nights into Dreams, players control the titular graceful Harlequin, Nights, and explore Nightopia and Nightmare, the 2 lands that make up the Dream World. A colourful, joyous, free-flying extravaganza with just a hint of that all-important uncanny creepiness, Nights into Dreams was hard to define upon its release, leading to many publications struggling to label it at the time. Strangely, it often gets defined as a platformer, but when you consider you'll be spending the vast majority of your game time controlling the airborne purple Nightmaren with nary a platform in sight, this definition just doesn't really ring true. Now sure, you can run around most stages as the human characters, but this is little more than a distracting aside. The real experience starts when you find Nights and take to the skies, with the gameplay switching from 3D exploration to soaring and looping along a 2.5D plane. While playing as Nights, the player must collect a number of MacGuffins before the timer runs out and the Nightmaren turns into a boring old kid again. And there are even some boss fights to get to grips with. So I ask you, does it look like a platformer to you? No, of course not. It's actually closer to a side-scrolling shoot-'em-up, except with no shooting and just loop-the-loop mechanics instead. So what, a loop-'em-up, maybe? Yeah, sure, that'll do. Number 5. Nights in the Nightmare. Right, enough about nightmares and nights, now let's talk about nightmares and nights. Sting Entertainment's 2006 DS title, Nights in the Nightmare, is an example of a game that mashes so many genres together in such bizarre ways that it no longer really resembles any of them, and its genre classification ends up reading like a list rather than a clear statement. On first glance, you'd be forgiven for thinking that it's a tactical role-playing game along the lines of Tactics Ogre. Allow me to inform you though that if you bought it with that comparison in mind, you'd be setting yourself up for quite the shock. The quote-unquote playable characters are mostly stationary, with players instead controlling a wisp that hovers about the screen. This wisp must physically drag action commands to characters to make them act, while various monsters on screen attack the wisp with projectiles. It's a bullet hell game. Get hit, and the wisp will lose time to charge up attacks, adding a time management aspect to the proceedings, on top of another mechanic that means enemies can only truly be defeated if they're lined up properly, tic-tac-toe style. So is it a turn-based strategy game, an RPG, a board game, bullet hell? We say it's all of those and more bashed together into something entirely new. A veritable smorgasbord, if you will. Maybe smorgasbord should be a genre in itself. A smorgasbord game. Number 4. Exo 1. Cosmic Adventure XO1, sadly unrelated to Ecto-1, was released across multiple formats in 2001 and created by Australian developers Expletive. XO1 is a momentum-based exploration game where players are tasked with traversing various distant planets in a transforming alien spacecraft. Often beautiful, occasionally eerie, and always lonely, it's another one of those games that starts to slide into experience territory. We'd almost call it a walking simulator, if it wasn't for the fact that you're flying at incredible speeds through the farthest reaches of space. While XO1 does have a narrative that unfolds as the game progresses, it's really about using the momentum and gravity-based mechanics to get from one place to another and enjoying the ride. It's a journey through the heavens, a taster of what it might be like to pilot incredible craft through the atmospheres of distant planets, and an opportunity to sit back and consider what might be out there beyond the solar system, all while being dazzled by stunning renditions of cosmic worlds and soothed by ethereal music. Or it's a glorified visualizer with some basic interaction. It's really up to you how you want to define it. Indeed, its genre is as fluid and malleable as the shiny ball it lets you fly around in. Number 3. Portal. While it's the game on today's list that probably does fit most comfortably into a particular genre, that of the puzzle platform game, Valve's meme-birthing phenomenon, Portal, does enough of its own thing that we really don't feel like slotting it into the puzzler bracket really does it justice. Far more freeform and open to experimentation than traditional puzzle games, Portal subverts a lot of the genre's expectations, throws some platforming into the mix, and has a large focus on atmosphere and world building, thanks in part to the DNA it shares with the Half-Life series. On top of this, there's the fact that Portal was made with an FPS engine, and so feels like an FPS game, only one with unique traversal options where the only gun available shoots portals instead of bullets. When it comes down to it, the fact is that Portal's portal mechanic is so iconic, ingenious, and unique that it and its sequel almost feel like they transcend the first-person puzzle platformer classification they've been stuck with and sit in a genre all of their own. They are puzzle games, no doubt, and they involve 3D platforming for sure, but they're also physics playgrounds built in a first-person shooter engine that let you pull off crazy science-defying stunts, all while being fed a level of world building and characterization that you just didn't get in other puzzle games at the time of the first title's release. In other words, Portal is just Portal. Number 2. Crypt of the Necrodancer. When we talked about Nights in the Nightmare a few entries ago, we discussed how it's a mashup of a few genres, with one in particular, the bullet hell genre, being the outlier that made it into something unique. There's a similar thing going on with Crypt of the Necrodancer, which at first glance is a common or garden dungeon crawling RPG with roguelike elements. The outlier here, though, is, well, rhythm action, of course. Yes, that's right. Canadian independent developers Brace Yourself Games apparently decided that the exploration and plunder of various dark and monster-filled caverns would be best accompanied by a killer soundtrack, constant motion, and tiles that light up like disco lights. The story explanation for all of this is that the evil Necrodancer has stolen protagonist Cadence's heart, and she has to stick to its beat on her quest to reclaim it. Whatever the reason though, there'll be no sneaking through the shadows and avoiding goblins in this dungeon. This is all about leaping from square to square in time with the music and battling enemies to the tempo. Of course, Crypt of the Necrodancer is still a dungeon crawler at heart, so classify it as that if that's what you want to do, but its rhythm-based gameplay makes it quite unlike anything else in the genre. Perfect for dancing dungeoneers, quick-stepping cave dwellers, and funky spelunkers. And number 1, Katamari Damacy. Katamari Damacy, and the Katamari series as a whole, takes the very idea of genre classification, rolls it up into a ball, and fires it into space. In the game, players take on the role of the Prince, a small fellow with an oddly tubular head. The Prince is tasked by his eccentric father, the King of all Cosmos, to roll up everyday objects into enormous balls that he can then use to recreate heavenly bodies like planets, moons, and even stars. How there's enough stuff on Earth to create heavenly bodies that are several times its size, we don't know. But we do know that this isn't the only facet of Katamari Damacy's premise that proves that the minds responsible went to some very bizarre places. Often tentatively defined as some kind of action puzzle game, Katamari Damacy really doesn't fall into either bracket. Is there much action? Well, it might be visually chaotic in places, but you're really just rolling a ball around, picking up mostly stationary flora, fauna, and inanimate objects. Is it puzzling? Well, no, it's pretty clear what you have to do, and the main challenge comes from gradually building up to larger and larger ball fodder so you can achieve the biggest ball possible in the time limit, which is sometimes tricky, but not in a brain-teasing sense. So how do you define a game whose goal is to make as big a ball as possible before the time runs out? Well, you don't. You just let it be what it wants to be, free from the constraints of other people's classifications and labels. A lesson for life, really. Roll on, Katamari. Roll on in your merry, unique way.